Hey guys, thank you for purchasing the screen mount kit. This is a mount kit that was developed over a couple months' time. It took a bit of effort to get it to this point. What it does is it lowers the screen about 1.6 inches or so. It angles it forward about 9 degrees, and it is adjustable to pitch it left toward the driver or straight toward the rear of the car. And this screen mount is the installation should be very straightforward. Follow the steps. If you have any questions, my email will be a link in the description below. Thanks guys, and let's dig into it. So to start the process, I put the screen in screen cleaning mode. You go to display screen clean mode. There you go, there's that. And next thing I like to do is fold up a towel and lay it right here on the center console. So I have just an old towel from the house laid down there. Cleaner would probably be better than dirty, but so lay a towel down in the center console, and then what you want to do is you look up underneath the screen, and here is an access door. That there is the cabin temperature sensing probe, and this here is a slot to pry that cover down. Now you'll notice the plastic on mine is marred quite a bit. That's because I've taken this off a couple of times. So what you would do is get a screwdriver, preferably one that is not very blunt, that's a little bit on the sharp side, and you would insert it in that gap, kind of push up and turn and get it inside. Now don't be afraid, this is kind of hard to get down. It'll startle you when it pops down, but you pop that down, and this is the cover that covers the access. Now we're going to be removing these hexagonal bolts here, which are 10 millimeter, but first let's unplug this temperature sensor and set this aside. So you pull that plug out. Now this is free. We're going to be removing this temperature sensor and installing it in the new soft shroud with the kit. So we'll set this aside, and we'll go ahead and remove these 10 millimeter hexagonal screws up here. Alright, so I've got my socket with my socket extension, and like I said, it's 10 millimeters. You just crack those loose like such, and then I take the ratchet right off of the extension and use the extension to spin these free. So there's one. It's a special shoulder bolt, so we'll go ahead and set that on the floor out of the way. Now we'll remove number 2. Bear with me here, I'm multitasking, holding the camera and doing this at the same time. So there's screw number 2, and you can see the same shoulder bolt there. So we'll go ahead and set that aside. Now at this point, believe it or not, that's all you need to do to completely remove the screen, with the exception of the wire harness from the screen. So that part is that's a little bit on the sketchy side. So I'm going to go ahead and stick the camera on the glass, the door, so that I can show you how to remove the screen safely. Alright, so once you have those screws removed, you can pull gently forward on the screen. I kind of wiggle it and pull, kind of wiggle and pull, and it will come out. Now be careful, because it's still attached to the wire harness. So, but there we have it removed. Now the wire harness threads through this plastic bezel, and you really can't get down to the release tab to release the harness. It's captured by the bezel itself. So the bezel is removed by using a number 30 Torx head bit. So Torx is a star, and it's number 30. And there are 2 screws. It's difficult to see on camera, but there's one on each side of this bezel. So I'll remove one and show you here. There's one. I highly recommend using in fact, I'd say the only way to do this properly is to use a magnetic tip screwdriver, because otherwise the screws could very easily fall down into the screen and short something out. So again, number 30 Torx. To get down, take that second screw off. There we go. There's screw number 2. Now at this point, the bezel, the plastic bezel, is loose from the screen, and what you can do is move that bezel up the harness a little bit. You want to reveal this connector here. There's a release tab on the side, so you would want to squeeze that release tab. Now this connector is somewhat snug onto the circuit board. It's best to put the screen down like so. Be careful not to drop the screen, but put the screen down like so. Pinch the release tab on this connector, and then you have to kind of work the connector around. To get it to come off. I squeeze this tab. This is the little release tab right here. I squeeze that with my index finger, and I roll the connector around, sort of in an oscillating motion while I pull on it. Be very, very careful. I would say if you're uncomfortable with this side of it, probably the best person to help you with would be somebody that does computer work, that builds gaming systems or whatever, because they're used to working with this type of connector. But it's a snug fit, but you push the release, and again, I rock it gently in circles while I tug to remove it. Do not pull on the wires themselves, pull on the connector body. So once you've got that disconnected, the screen is free. You can set that down on the towel, and then you can remove the bezel. There we go, the bezel is removed. Now you'll notice some scarring of the plastic. That's just normal from prying that door off. I don't really know that there's much way around that, because this bezel cover is retained with snaps on the inside, and you can't get to them to release it, so you just have to pry kind of hard on that cover to remove it. So the bezel's removed, the screen is removed, and we have the lower bezel cover that has the temperature sensor on it that's removed. So that temperature sensor will get installed onto the new soft shroud that we're making to replace the factory plastic shroud or bezel assembly. So let's go ahead to the workbench. I'll remove this sensor, and we will start with the new mount portion of the installation. Now, the majority of people that install the kit will be using the soft shroud, and that soft shroud will house the temperature sensor. However, for those of you that don't want to use the soft shroud, this temperature sensor needs to be mounted somewhere in this general vicinity. And I looked into making mounting brackets and that for it, but what I found actually works the best from a placement standpoint is to merely zip tie it to the side here. Now that may seem simplistic, but again, the majority of people are going to be using the soft shroud that holds this. But for those that aren't using the soft shroud, this is the best mounting position that I've found. So the way that we go about that is, got one zip tie here, and what I do is I bend and fold the end over. Let's see, let's fold it a couple of times here. You want to give it a nice J curve, and you stick it through one hole, and it starts to come up through the next above it, and you feed it through. You feed it through until you have it in this position here. Then you install the sensor, slip it through, Snip that off. And then you can go ahead and plug the harness in. So, and believe it or not, that may seem like a very simplistic way to mount this, but I tried a number of different mounting positions and methods, and I was having issues, and that's a whole nother long story, but just a simple zip tie mounting it to this location really works the best. It's within about 1.5 inches of where it was from the factory. It is not, the probe is not directly contacting anything, and it's open to the ambient air, so it works really well in that location. Alright, so once you have the screen removed and the factory bezel removed, you can go ahead and install these little Velcro tabs that are included with the kit. So they go right here on the sides in place of the factory bezel there, one on either side. And that is, these are Velcro retainers to help retain the soft shroud in place, and we'll cover that soft shroud installation at the end of the video. But for now, go ahead and install these Velcro tabs, one on either side. So you can see them installed here, screwed down to the factory screw tab locations for the original bezel that went around. So now we'll go ahead and install the mount. Now, when you look at the mount, there are a couple things to be aware of. One, the way the mount sets on the screen. Now, this is the orientation that the mount will be on the screen, and you'll notice these original mount locations on the screen are slotted, and therefore it would allow the screen to move forward and back. Now, I'm pointing this out before we install the screen, because what you're going to want to do is make sure the screen is planted all the way forward, or you could pull it out, but preferably all the way forward on both of those tabs. If it's cocked to one side or another, the screen will look crooked in the dash. So it's something I'll point out again when we get to that point in the installation. But for now, we'll go ahead and set the screen down and install the mount into the factory location. Also, you'll notice this is a wire harness retention tab. That's here for this part of the wire harness that came off the screen. When you plug this back into the screen and reinstall the screen, this tab here, this wire guide, will capture around the factory harness to hold it in line with the screen as a strain relief for when the screen is swiveled back and forth, and I'll point that out as well later. So the mount just simply slides in place of where the factory screen was located. It couldn't be any simpler. Now, I want to point out, when you go to put the screws into the dash, you'll notice that this lower portion is in the way of the screws. You can't really get the screws into the hole. So what you want to do, once this is slid into the dash, you can pivot the bottom to put one screw in, and then you can swivel it the other way to put the other screw in. So just a little pointer for you. So we'll go ahead, slide this in, and we'll slide the one screw up in place. Now, I'm not snugging this screw down. I want to leave it a little bit loose to allow the other screw to install more easily. So I'm going to swivel the bottom out of the way here to provide clearance for the second screw. So now that I've got both screws in place and they're just loosely there, you can see it's not snugged down yet. I can go ahead and snug it down. You don't want to crank these really tight because the end of each of these bolts is not very large in diameter, but just modestly snug would be fine. So there we go, it's snugged down. Alright, so now that we've got the mount in the dash and it's snugged down, we'll go ahead and install the screen. So you're going to want to go ahead and reattach this connector. Again, be gentle and careful, rocking it around in small circles. Wiggle it in place. Then you've got these two 5/16 thread screws that are the 1/2 inch head, 13 millimeter. These will be going up through the bottom of the screen and into the mount. So we'll go ahead and install that now. You use one hand to hold the screen and the other hand to insert the screw. So install one bolt here, just partially. And we'll go ahead and slide the other one in place and make sure that you have the washer under the head of this bolt. Very, very important, under both bolts. Now, as I mentioned before, the screen has slotted holes, and you want to make sure that the screen is not cocked left or right on those slotted holes, but rather that it is seated all the way forward on those slots. So once the screen is roughly in place there, you can go ahead and snug these screws down from the underside. All right, so you can see the underside here. The wire harness goes through this strain relief, and that strain relief allows the wire to be held stable or in line with the connector. So when you swivel the screen left and right, the wire harness stays in place. Now we're going to go ahead and snug these bolts down here and get those snug. What I like to do is lightly snug one bolt, just a tiny bit, then go to the other one. It keeps the screen from scooting. Go back to the first one, give it a little bit more of a snug. Second one, more of a snug. All right, so now we've got the screen installed, and I'll go ahead and sweep it left and right, and you can see how the wire harness is, how this guide here keeps the wire from bending at the connector. It takes the strain off of the connector at the screen and allows the screen to swivel and curve the harness very slightly right here, rather than, if this guide weren't here, it would be bending left and right on this connector, which over time would fatigue the connector. All right, so there's the screen mount installed. You can see it swivels left and right. You'll notice that it does stop before it hits the dashboard on both sides. I purposely designed it so that it cannot contact the dashboard and potentially leave any marks on either the dashboard or the side of the screen. The screen actually pivots further toward the passenger than it does toward the driver. You'll notice that it gets closer to the dash there. That's because for the driver, the further it angles toward the driver, the more the screen dives behind the steering wheel. But for the passenger, I wanted it to be as close to head-on for them as possible. All right, so now we're going to install this component, and I've already got it installed on the screen in my car, but this is the orientation that you would hold this component, and it fits over, you can see the rear here of the screen mount, and lines up with the back of your screen. And you would use two small Allen bolts that are included with the kit and the included Allen wrench. This component fits in the back of the screen, and then you install those two Allen head screws. See if I can angle this up and give you an underside view there. So there it is, mounted to the back of the screen. Sorry for the glare. But mounts up to the back of the screen with the included Allen screws, and there is clearance for the wire harness here, and as you sweep the screen left and right, this is a nice soft transition for the wire harness. So the next component that we're going to install, I'm going to flex the screen down here, curve that down. Now we're going to go ahead and install this dash cover. Now this is you can do all of this with the screen mount already installed in the car, and this component goes around the screen mount, and it fits down into the cutaway here in the dashboard, and it sort of snaps in place. There you go. And on the underside, there are tabs that hook up. So those tabs, you want to make sure that those tabs are hooked up into place, and that holds the mount or the cover from moving around. So next we're going to go ahead and install the temp sensor into the temp sensor mount plate and mount that up in the car, and we're going to go ahead and do that on the workbench in the office. All right, so now we come to the part of installing the cabin temperature sensor into the plastic shroud. There are two different style cabin temperature sensors. This is for the old style Model 3, and this is for the newer Model 3s. I believe it's 2020 and up, as well as the Model Y. And as you can see here, the lower part of the plastic cover has, it can accept either temp sensor. It's very, very simple. You simply take either your old style Model 3 temp sensor and install it in place here using the included small self-tapping screws as shown here. Get a better image of it there. Or if you've got the fan style cabin temp sensor, it mounts in this area here and uses the same two self-tapping screws, again included in the kit. So you would install those screws in place to mount the temp sensor down, and then it gets installed up inside the car. Now, once you've got the temp sensor installed, I'd like to point out something here. The screws don't need to be cranked down real tight. In fact, you can see even a little bit of a gap I left there. What I like to do is tighten the screws down just enough to squish that rubber, foam rubber gasket between the temp sensor and the cover. And the next step I'm going to show you will be accomplished in the car, but it's difficult to see up under the dashboard in the car, so I'd like to show that to you on the workbench. And that is mounting this, attaching this cabin temp sensor plate to the bottom side of the cover. Now, this cover gets mounted in this orientation up in the dash, and this component mounts up underneath, but it's very difficult to see in the car, so I want to demonstrate that here on the workbench. The way this component mounts to the cover, again, this is up on the underside, it's in this orientation in the car, is it lays down here, and you can see how it sort of keys in place, and these lines here line up to hold that cover in place. And then there are 4 screws that get screwed here. Those are 4 silver Phillips screws included in the kit, just like you see here. So we'll go ahead and install that, and you can see what that looks like then. And there's no need to make these tight. Just lightly snug them. And there you go. That's the way the cover looks from the underside of the car. This is the orientation that it sits in the dash, but you can see the inside there. And this is a little bit of a snug fit. The wire and that kind of it folds over up inside the dash, but it does fit up there. Once it's tightened down, it adds quite a bit of rigidity and strength to the cover. But again, this would be done inside the car. This cover gets installed in the dashboard, and then the cabin temp sensor gets installed from the underside. And there is enough room to get a small screwdriver up there. So yeah, that's it. So there you can see it installed. And one thing that I found is helpful, if you're having a hard time lining up the screw holes, put a screw in one side, and then you can use something long and pointy to stick into one of the other holes and line them up on the other side. Sometimes that's helpful. I've found that installing the passenger side screws, you probably need to kneel on the ground on the passenger side of the car, and on the to do the driver's side, you'll need to do that, access that from the driver's side. It's just easier. So that's what it looks like from the underside. And there you go, all installed and looking pretty. All right, well, that concludes the installation of the swiveling screen mount kit for the Tesla Model 3 and Model Y. I hope the installation went smoothly for you. As I've mentioned before, my email address will be printed on the instructions, as well as a link in the description below on this video. So if you have any questions, let me know. But other than that, keep your eye on my Shopify page, the Tech Forum Shopify page, for other interesting products that we are working on and we'll be marketing over time. So thank you very much, and you guys have yourselves a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.